Hello everybody, this is Baragon of Gamergate. I wanted to take a break to actually play some video games, but unfortunately, SJWs are at it again. Innuendo Studios has put out this series of videos called Why Are You So Angry? And watching them all made me so pissed off that I knew that I had to make a response video. If you need some background on what a social justice warrior actually is, I recommend checking out the first video that I posted. A lot of what I have to say here will make more sense if you watch that first. But if you're already a fan of mine, let's go on ahead. Okay, so he hasn't even started talking yet, and I should probably take this notification as a sign of some kind that the content in this video is gonna upset me. By the way, have you heard any good jokes about SJWs getting triggered? Well, if you haven't, then just look up the results for the hashtag on Twitter, and you'll be bombarded with comedy gold.
What was Gamergate, even? Is typically phrased as, was Gamergate a movement to demand ethical reform in games journalism?
Yes, it is. Hey, these response videos are easy. Wait a minute, what is this? An autopsy? How can this be an autopsy if Gamergate is clearly not dead?
I'm not dead. What? Nothing. Here's your ninepence. I'm not dead.
Yeah. He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not.
He isn't?
Well, he will be soon. He's very ill. I'm getting better.
No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment. Oh,
I'm so tired of aggros pushing this narrative that Gamergate is dead. Have you even seen how many people subscribe to Kotaku in Action? How could we be dead if there are so many of us?
For the people who knew what Gamergate was but did not participate in it, what Gamergate referred to as anti-gamergate, but was really just the entire rest of the world.
Oh, and this is another tactic right here from anti-gamergate that really pisses me off. It's when they say that anti-gamergate is not really a thing. And I say, you're a thing whether you want to be a thing or not. Just because we have a listed agenda, a hashtag that we gather under, our own mascot, doesn't mean that because you don't have all of these things that you get out of all of this. It's like when my friends and I couldn't find another team to play softball against. We just walked down the street, throwing balls at everyone, until eventually they took up baseball bats. I mean, what happened afterward wasn't exactly a softball game, but at least there was another team. Or take a look at it this way. These 5 stations on the diagram represent different sorts of occupations that people can fill while they're on the internet. On any given session of internet use, a person can move from station to station. But by and large, the rest of the people online will identify you as only occupying one of these stations. I'll explain. At the top, we have the content creators. Now, the content that they create can either be online or off. It could be anything from a piece of music to a movie. Getting into this station can be rather difficult, and as a result, these people are probably in the minority. Many people create content online, but few get public recognition. In the next station, we can find the people who make a living based off of criticizing the content created by the content creators. In the next station, we can find probably the largest station of all of them, and these are pretty much your typical internet users. They can comment on the articles that they find, and they can comment on the content itself, but they really don't make a living off doing it. It's in the next station where things get really good. This station is occupied by people who don't critique culture directly. Instead, what they do for either fun or profit is to criticize the people who criticize culture. This is where you'll find my comrades in Gamergate. We criticize the social justice warriors who are criticizing our games. And then, in the last station, is where you'll find the people who criticize the people who criticize other critics. I think I got that right anyway. And in any case, this is where you'll find anti-gamergate, because they are the critics of Gamergate. Now, looking at this, you can see that the further down the diagram you go, the more progressively, let's say, meta things become. But take my word for it, this place is where all the money's made. You can't tell me that this isn't something that a lot of people wouldn't want to do with their free time. This guy would have you believe that anti-gamergate resides in this third station on the diagram, and that they only seldom interact with Gamergate just to tell us to shut up. But I say, follow the money.
The first group wasn't necessarily interested in journalistic integrity, but found it a useful cover when harassing women and minorities in the game space, and a useful way to network with others who did the same. This was the group that drove 3 women from their home, doxed many others, sent armed SWAT teams to the houses of their critics with false reports, and, well, we'll be here all day if I read the entire rap sheet.
Excuse me, bias? The only reason why Kotaku published these articles is because Kotaku in Action is trying to destroy Kotaku. And they have good reason to. Kotaku is absolutely terrible. And I know this because Ralph Retort tells me so.
It began on 4chan's Politically Incorrect, a subforum popular with anti-feminists and neo-Nazis.
Oh my god, stop saying this. Gamergate did not begin on Pol, because where did Pol come from? Huh? This is like when a creationist argues for the existence of God. Oh, by the way, everyone, I'm an atheist. Isn't that amazing? I realize that it's bullshit, this whole idea that the Earth was created in 7 days, and I think, that has intellectually fortified me to the extent that I can now adequately educate people of other genders what it's like to live their lives. Now, what this guy's doing here is called the argument of first cause. But if Pol caused Gamergate, then what caused Pol? I'll tell you what caused Pol. It's kids whose first exposure to Nazis was watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. But in that case, we gotta ask ourselves, where did Indiana Jones come from? The answer, of course, is George Lucas. But then that begs the question, where did George Lucas come from? Modesto, California. And where is Modesto, California? That's fucking right. It's a 2-hour drive from the Bay Area. Checkmate, aggros.
What did Gamergate want? The short version is war. They wanted to destroy the other anywhere they found it, a desire that predates Gamergate by a long way. Look at all the military language. Look at all the anti-progressive allies. The core of Gamergate doesn't want to live in a feminist, anti-racist world, but also doesn't actually have the power to prevent one from existing. But they do have the power to impede it, to disrupt progress, to wrap bigotry in a bunch of political euphemisms to make it more culturally acceptable. This is a war in the Norse mythology sense, a war that can't be won, but can be prolonged.
Hold on there. If war was declared, the war was declared on us. It was declared when all the mainstream game journals published those articles declaring that gamers were dead. This collusion was exposed when the transcript from Game Journal Prose was brought to light. All kinds of skeletons came out of all kinds of closets from those transcripts, which I have read, and you can imagine the terrible things that I read. I mean, how dare they congregate together on hidden forums to conspire to push an agenda? I mean, who does that?
And when they can't dig anything up, they invent it. Sarah Nyberg speaks out against Gamergate? Just say she fucks dogs. Tim Schafer mocked Gamergate at GDC? Just call him a racist.
That was totally a racist joke. Gamergate has always held a firm stance that there are some things that are just not appropriate to joke about.
Oh! How many Gamergaters does it take to make a single piece of armor?
Oh god, I don't know.
50. 1 to do the modeling, 1 to do the materials, and 40 to tweet that it's not your shield.
Okay. Again, I cannot be blamed for what the puppet says.
Jesus fucking Christ, Tim. Holy shit. In what world did you think that was an appropriate thing to do? I can only imagine how claustrophobic your echo chamber is, Tim, because getting on stage at the Game Developers Conference and mocking women and minorities is not professional, Tim. It is not appropriate. It will never, ever be the right thing to do.
But you made a great point just a moment ago about the hostility toward Christians. And it was a church.
Yeah, nice try. Let's be honest with ourselves. He went to the church out of convenience. KFC had closed. There is nothing off limits to be joked about.
Studies show that reactionary comments can change how the public responds to a piece of media. It's why Popular Science turned off comments on their site. This intentional polarization from small minorities within a community is largely what movements like Gamergate are for. To react so negatively as to make a reasonable statement seem like the far end of a spectrum, and to make the halfway point between reasonable and bugfuck irrational seem like the moderate position. And that moderate position was the niche carved out for Jack. What Jack wanted out of his involvement with Gamergate was complicated.
Well, if Jack is anything like me, it's swords. Lots and lots of swords.
A solid theory should be constructed like a table, an explanation supported by sturdy points of evidence, in this case testimony that game designer Zoe Quinn had slept with games journalist Nathan Grayson in exchange for a good review. From there, everything gets pulled into the narrative. Social justice warriors sneaking their politics into games, journalists doing favors for their friends, a culture of fear around speaking out against feminists.
I don't know about you, but that table scares the crap out of me.
But then the facts come in. Grayson never wrote a review of Quinn's game. Nobody at Kotaku ever reviewed Quinn's game. Grayson never wrote anything about Quinn while they were dating, and the ex-boyfriend retracted the statement, claiming it was a typo.
Okay. For a hipster, you obviously don't keep up with the trends. Zoe Quinn is basically like Animal Collective at this point. Nobody's talking about her. So what if all of those allegations turned out to not be true? What matters is what they exposed. And what it exposed was that there was a twisted and vindictive group of people within gaming. Rather than make their own journalism, I mean games, they seek to force everyone else to conform to what their desires of what the culture should look like.
You can't tell me it doesn't have legs. I know it has legs because it's a table, and tables have legs. Where most people would say it's just a plank of wood.
No, I would say it looks like a shield.
What he wanted was to hang out in a room full of angry people telling him that being angry was the right way to be. What he wanted was for sites to publicly post an ethics policy, with no thoughts on what it should say.
Disclosure policies are very important. If a journalist divulges their financial connections to the subject matter that they're covering, I can exercise a certain degree of skepticism about what I'm reading. I mean, how else am I supposed to know to read something with skepticism? If conflicts of interest are not disclosed in an article, I might end up making a purchase that makes me unhappy. So disclosures must have a place in an article to serve as a warning that reading this article might trigger me to purchase something that could make me feel slightly unhappy.
And fire the people he didn't like.
Why wouldn't we want her to be fired? She has an agenda. Don't you know what an agenda is? I keep meaning to look it up myself. One sec. Alright, yeah, so we don't want anyone with an agenda. We only want writers who have no point of view whatsoever.
Meanwhile, Lee Alexander has been talking about problems with games journalism since before Gamergate existed, but she's been critical of the movement, so she's dead to him.
According to who? Leigh Alexander? Fucking bias. Your source that Leigh Alexander wrote those articles is Leigh Alexander? You fucking moron.
What he achieved, what he was brought into Gamergate to achieve, was to amplify everything Gamergate did in his name, to pressure sites into covering the movement sympathetically or not at all, to respond to every report of harassment with skepticism and demands for proof.
Let me guess, you're talking about sea lioning here, aren't you? What is so bad about asking people to prove what they have to say? I don't want to hear about your life experience. I want to read a list of numbers on a graph. Like the Factual Feminist. On every show, she shows me graphs that indicate that I never need to change anything about how I live my life. Thank you, based mom.
Perception may not matter to the harasser, but perception is the difference between a crusade of a few hundred and one of a few thousand. In regards to Jack, perception is everything.
I fail to see your point. Perhaps if you provided me with some evidence to back up my perception, I might take that more seriously. Thanks for watching, everybody. I know that Innuendo Studios put in a lot of effort with their video, what with all the color and moving images and decent microphone. And I know that my content is essentially made up of about 50% of his content, but you probably should donate to my Patreon instead, because if anything, I have enhanced it with logic and reason.
And whenever the next reactionary 4chan raid disguising itself as something vaguely reasonable comes around, they're gonna go straight for Angry Jack. They probably still have his email, and provided they tell him the right things, he'll join back up in a heartbeat.
Metalgate? Oh, please let it be Metalgate. It had so much potential.